Hello. Today we are wrapping up my reading for the month of July, and like I talked about in my mid-month check-in, I feel like July was a lot about, me kind of like getting back in the groove with reading, which I think I've mostly-ish done. I don't know. I've been very distracted. Things have been very tense in my day job, so that has been taking up a lot of brain space for me, but I did read at least a couple of books that I thought were absolutely fantastic, and overall, I definitely had some things that I really enjoyed, and I also just feel like I'm kind of getting back into my normal kind of pattern of reading. So we're going to talk about my stats, challenges, and then we will talk about my disappointments, my surprises, and my hits for the month of July. I read 18 books, 14 of which I owned, 4 of which I did not, for a total page count of 6,285 pages and an average book length of 349 pages. The average amount of time a book had been on my TBR was 9 months, and the average age of book I read was 5 years. I paid for 44.44% of the books that I read, and gosh, I need to work on my formula here. This includes some books that I got for free. I do love a free Kindle pick, so it's artificially low. I've got to work on that formula. Anyway, for now, it's $4.83. All that to say, in terms of genre, pretty good mix for the month. So far and away my biggest category was fantasy, which makes sense because I was working on a YA fantasy vlog, as well as just happening to have read a couple of other fantasy books. But that was my biggest category, followed by sci-fi and mystery. We just had a little soupçon of a bunch of other genres, but dominated by SFF, it seems like, this month, as well as mystery. And then ratings-wise, my average rating was 3.333333. I had a lot of 3 stars, which I think is a little unusual. I definitely had some things that I was not as into this month. Overall, my impression of July was I was reading a lot of meh things and a lot of things that were not for me, with some notable exceptions, because I did have 1 4.5 and 1 5. I had a couple of 4s and a couple of 3.5s, but a lot of 3 and lower, it seems like. And then getting into challenges that I'm not going to talk about in a different category, I guess really the only thing I need to tell you about is I did read The Arc That I Had of Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison. I don't know how to feel about this book, guys. I ended up giving it 3 stars because if I go into it and think about it as sort of a different kind of paranormal romance, then I liked it pretty well. Like, I liked the family dynamics. I ultimately liked the relationship between our main character and the dude that she runs into that she knew from when she was younger. But this is supposed to be horror, and it is grosser than your average paranormal romance. Like, it does have more body horror, so I should say that this is a werewolf novel. And the inciting incident is our heroine is at home in her hometown, that is, with her twin sister who is pregnant, to kind of help her last stages of her pregnancy. And she is driving home one night, she hits what she thinks is a dog, and it turns out it's a werewolf who bites her. And then the rest of the book is her like kind of confronting the fact that that it was actually a werewolf and that she's going to be turning into a werewolf. She also has this guy who always had a thing for her that she's kind of starting something up with, which is where I think the paranormal romance element comes in, along with sort of like the small town feels, like the family dynamic. All of that felt very sort of like Sookie Stackhouse-esque, or I don't know, any number of like small town paranormal romances I've read. But because she got bit, there's like this wound situation, which is a lot of what the book, like that's where the body horror bit comes in, which you would not find in your typical paranormal romance. But that being said, I felt like it was veering more in that overall kind of direction. I don't know. I think as horror, it just felt too light. And I was wanting to try something from Rachel Harrison because I've heard that about her books, that she writes like lighter horror. But I think if I'm wanting, what I learned from this book is that if I'm wanting horror, I don't know that I want a cozy element to it really, which is what this book had. So I could see other people liking that vibe better than than I did. For me, I just landed on a 3 because there were things I didn't like, things I did. So I felt like a B kind of felt right. I don't know. I was very conflicted about it. I could see other people liking this a lot more than I did, but tonally, my takeaway from this book is that if I want horror, like, I want to go for it. I'm not as much into cozy horror the way that I would be cozy mystery sometimes, or like a cozy romance. I'm down with those, like even sci-fi or fantasy. I can get into sort of like cozier vibes. Horror, not as much what I'm looking for. And then I think everything else is in a different category. So let's start with disappointments. So 2 that I don't have in physical form. First, I'm going to say Below Zero by Ali Hazelwood. Now, I did not hate this. I gave this 3 stars. My problem with this book, well, I guess again was sort of like an issue of coziness. So the situation our main character finds herself in is very harrowing and very life or death. She is in a situation where she's about to die, and yet she doesn't really seem to be treating it that way. It seems to be very sort of like derp, like thinking about the thing. I don't know. I wish that hadn't been the situation in the present timeline that the heroine was in, because it's got like kind of a dual timeline going back and forth. She had like this connection with this dude at the place that she's now working. When she was still a student, she went and was like interviewing him, and they ended up like banging it out in his office. She, thought warmly of him. She's not really looking for a relationship. Like they were, they had a really good connection, but it was just a one-time thing, but they left that on good terms. Then when she comes back to actually work at the place, she basically has a problem with something that he does in the context of work. So she starts to think of him as like an enemy. But then she is in this harrowing situation, and it's just the tone of it was totally off. I was like, her internal dialogue while she's literally about to die, to me, the math is not mathing here. So while there were parts of this I like Ali Hazelwood, I like the way she tells stories. It wasn't that I had a terrible time in this one, but this was definitely my least favorite of anything I've read from her. And I actually saw several people saying this was their favorite of the 3 novellas that have come out this year. So I think that this is just a taste thing. For me, if you're gonna put your main character in such a serious situation, like I want them to take it a little more seriously than she seemed to be in her internal monologue. Then The Guest House by Robin, I want to say Morgan Bentley. Yes, Robin Morgan Bentley. This, again, is an expectation issue. This seems to be a theme this month. The Guest House is set up as an isolation thriller on the back. The way that it's sort of framed is, okay, couple on their baby moon. They go to this like Airbnb kind of situation. It seems like they wake up and like all their phones, their keys, all that is gone, and they are trapped in this guest house, the titular guest house. She's pregnant, she's going into labor. Oh my God, what's going on? So that was what I thought I was getting. That sounds like your typical isolation thriller, right? The problem is it's intercut with a different timeline, and it made the overall book feel much more like a domestic suspense. So I actually ended up DNFing this ish. I read about a third of it, and then I read the last like 15% of it. So I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads because I felt like I'd read enough to give you like an opinion, but I technically didn't read all of it. So that's the disclaimer here, because the third I read in the first part, I was like, this is so dull. Like, this isn't what I thought I was getting. This feels like a domestic suspense instead of like an isolation thriller. I didn't feel any of the tension. It just wasn't the kind of book that I thought I was signing up for. And I think it was perfectly well done if that's the expectation you have of the book. And I liked what the ending ended up being. Answered some of the problems that I had with the setup, the ending did, but I don't know. This just didn't end up being the kind of book I thought it was, and therefore it felt disappointing to me. Even though I think a lot of other people probably would like it better than I did, I would just tell you, if you're expecting a straight up isolation thriller, that's not really the vibe of this, and that's what I had thought I was reading. So expectation mismatch really is like root cause of what the problem here was. And then my last disappointment is Embassy Town by China Miéville. I talked about this in my travel reading vlog because this is a book I picked up while I was on vacation. I think based on feedback from that video, it sounds like a lot of people who like China Miéville don't necessarily love this one. So it may be that I just kind of randomly picked one that's not one of his most loved works. But this felt very cerebral. It felt very idea heavy. It just did not entertain me, and that's really what I want from a sci-fi. So I just think the project of the book, again, expectation issue. This truly is the theme. Expectation I had of this was that this was going to be a more literary sci-fi, but still pretty entertainment focused. And I would say that this is much more idea focused, specifically thinking through sort of language and the philosophy of language, maybe like semiotics kind of a thing, which is just not what I thought I was signing up for. So disappointing because this was my first outing with this author. I'm not opposed to trying something else from him, but I think if I do, I should do some research on what the best thing to read from him would be. I just realized that I'm actually not talking about this, but I did like Warcross. I thought this was fun. So yeah, if you came in the thumbnail for this book, a more detailed review of it in my YA vlog that I did earlier this month, and it was fun. And I think I'll continue in it, but I think I'm gonna get the continuation from the library. So yeah. Anyway, speaking of that vlog, another book that I read and very much enjoyed was Spend the Dawn. Now, the reason I'm putting this as a surprise is that I'd heard very polarized opinions about this book. It seemed like some people really loved it, but a lot of other people were really disappointed with it. And I think the answer to why people feel disappointed in this is that the back copy, or like the description of what this book is about, is effectively over by maybe not even halfway through the book. So this is pitched as Mulan meets Project Runway. I don't know that Project Runway is exactly the description I would give, but it is like a fashion-based competition our heroine is in. So I get the comparison. Set at the palace, it's all about like politics and palace intrigue and her trying to conceal the fact that she's a woman because tailors are supposed to be men. So I think all of that makes sense, the back cover copy, for the first 40 to 50% of this book. But then the book really goes to a different place. Like, it becomes very much like a road trip book. It is very focused on a slow burn romance. Now, I really liked the quest that she was on, and I really liked the slow burn romance. Like, that really worked for me. So I actually ended up really enjoying this in a way that I wasn't totally sure I would. Like, just because the reviews had been so mixed, I wasn't sure how I would do. So I was pleasantly surprised to report that I actually really enjoyed this. I will also continue this. This is also a duology, so I will read the second book. Yeah, I can see if you really wanted the first half of the book to be the whole book, I can see why this would be disappointing. But for me, I actually found that I quite enjoyed both halves of the book. So ultimately, I ended up really liking this. And then we are already to my hits. So I have 3 hits. I have a 4, a 4.5, and a 5 to talk to you about. So let's start with the 4. The 4-star is The Misunderstood Jew by Amy Jill Levine. This book I could have put as a surprise probably, because I ended up being surprised at exactly the full project of it. But I was reading it because it's basically about contextualizing the story of Jesus in his Jewish milieu and in Jewish religion. So the parts of the book that were doing that I really enjoyed and I thought were great and were what I came to the book for. What it also includes is a lot of discussion of interfaith dialogue. Or it sounded like I said inner. Not interfaith, interfaith dialogue, specifically between Jews and Christians. And I thought that part of the book was really fascinating. It included a lot of sort of inside baseball theology talk that I enjoyed. So a couple of points that I thought she brought up that were very interesting, of 2 areas of progressive theology that inadvertently, like, I don't think any of these, well, I hope not. I don't think most of the proponents of these theological schools are intending to be anti-Semitic, but she is making the point that by framing the story of the New Testament the way that they do, it ends up being an indictment of Judaism as sort of like a byproduct of what it's doing. So first of all, liberation theology, I hadn't thought about that, but apparently a lot of the early liberation theologians like Goodreads and a couple of others apparently have like overt anti-Semitism in some of their writing, which I did not know, so that was interesting. But the one that hit close to home, and I think is a great example of like ongoing need for white feminists to be challenged and not just center their own concerns as the only ones in trying to progress a feminist perspective, is that she pointed out that a lot of feminist theology, which tries to frame Jesus as a feminist, does so by describing practices of Judaism at the time as being oppressive to women, and essentially becomes anti-Semitic because it's treating Judaism or like the old law as anti-woman versus Jesus is just like fully pro-woman. So I think she just goes in and sort of like problematizes that, and I think as somebody who's sort of like post-Christian, it was I just appreciated that perspective and having some reflection on when I was a progressive Christian, really trying to make sort of like a progressive feminist theology work. The unintentional but very real sort of dichotomizing between Judaism and Christianity vis-a-vis misogyny. So I really just appreciated that as a challenge. There were some things that I thought resonated more and less in terms of some of her critiques, but just overall I thought that it was a thought-provoking book and one well worth reading, and one that gave me some reflection and some food for thought. So I felt like it should be a hit. My 4.5 star, I'm not totally sure how to do this, guys, because like if you're asking me what my rating is, it is 4.5. I am going to share with you my honest experience of reading this book, but I do want to acknowledge that I just am intrinsically biased and I don't quite know how to handle reviewing a book by somebody who I do consider to be a friend. So I just want to put that out there that I don't even really know how to review this because I've not been in the position of like raving to this degree about a friend's book before. Like the book is Pretty Dead Queens. The author is Alexa Dunn. I really enjoyed the Ivies. You guys know that I did. It almost made my top 10 mysteries of the year list. It's not that I didn't really enjoy the Ivies. I gave it 4 stars, which for me is like an A-. Like I really enjoyed that book, but I absolutely loved Pretty Dead Queens. So it just feels a little bit different because it feels like, really, Mara, are you kind of just blowing smoke up Alexa's ass here? I guess my only response is not consciously, but I just want to be aware that unconscious bias is a thing. All that being said, Pretty Dead Queens is so my kind of book. It is exactly my kind of YA mystery. It is a version, so it's sort of like kind of a play on Cabot Cove, Murder, She Wrote. So our main character's mom has passed away. She moves in with her grandma, who is sort of like a Jessica Fletcher, Nora Roberts kind of character in the small California town. So she's a best-selling mystery author. Her original bestseller was based on the murder of her actual best friend back in the 70s. And then in the present timeline, our main character, one of her new friends at her school, ends up being killed in a very similar way. And so it's sort of like secrets from the past, or like past killing, like did they get the right person and what actually really happened with that, and then also trying to solve the current mystery. So it's not a dual timeline because we are not going back into the past in terms of perspective. It is them investigating a murder from the past, which is definitely my preference. I loved small town cozy vibes. I liked the sort of cheeky nods to a Jessica Fletcher or a Miss Marple kind of vibe. And I loved the way the plot developed. I will tell you, it takes a while for it to kind of really get going because it is a pretty big cast. But once you hit kind of like the 30% mark, I could not put it down. Like I just binged the whole thing. I thought it was super readable, so entertaining. I also really liked that she included some themes around grief that I thought were great. And yeah, just overall, I really, really love this book. It was exactly my kind of book. Also, one of the characters is called Mara, so, you know, also the bias there. But anyway, I really love this book. I'm excited for people to read it. It comes out in October. And then I have like the least unique opinion ever for the 5-star book that I have for you. and that is Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. This is going to be in a TBR video, like a reading challenge video that will come out in August, so you will get more of my thoughts in that video. But for now, I will just say this is one of those moments where I just feel kind of like I'm getting on the bandwagon. To me, this is an absolute masterpiece. Even the stories that I didn't like as much were still really good. God, they're just so good, and it hits. This makes me feel similarly to how I felt the first time I read The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter, which is like, yes, like this is how you smartly incorporate feminism into fiction. And it's not like, neither of them are trying to be subtle about it. Like, that's kind of the project, is in this case exploring women's bodily autonomy in the context of feminism. In Angela Carter's case, like retelling fairy tales, but while highlighting how misogynistic those fairy tales are. But the project of this is so clear and just so well done. Like, it's so well executed. There's some speculative elements in here that I thought were, or like maybe fabulous kind of vibe, magical realism, that I thought were handled really well. One of my favorite stories actually included a pandemic storyline, so I thought that was cool. And then there's one that's a take on, like the longest story probably is a take on Law & Order SVU that I thought was brilliant. I don't know, guys, this was so innovative, inventive, perfectly executed. There's only 8 stories, and now I'm just sad that we don't have more, and I'm sure that she's working on another brilliant collection, which I will happily gobble up greedily whenever it is released. But this was fantastic. This was as good as I had been hyped up to think it might be. I have no criticisms. This was absolutely fantastic. So I think that will do it for me for July's reading. Definitely let me know what you thought about any of the books that I talked about. Let me know how your reading in the month of July went, etc. And yeah, I think that will do it for me. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you're having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!